And you just heard that City Life in the Rain by Kenny Leckie, taken from the album of the same name. And I'm delighted to be joined by Kenny now. Hello.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm really well, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this. What can you tell us about the album City Life in the Rain?
So it was a record I started back in 2020. So for a bit of context, I've been mainly a hardcore musician. I grew up mainly playing in really noisy bands, but I studied classical music and I studied jazz when I was younger,
Right?
and I've always wanted to compose for films and TV and that sort of thing. And I sort of like semi stopped playing gigs at the end of 2019, just because I'd kind of lost the love for playing gigs a wee bit. I've been doing it since I was 13,
Right.
playing shows. I was 13 at that point. In 2019, I was 32. So I'd been doing it for enough a long time. I've got the injuries to show for it. And I was wanting to just do something a wee bit more than just kind of 3 minute, 4 minute songs and something a little bit more involved that was more in tune with what I listened to most of the time. Like I think the idea of like the people who play noisy bands and they do a solo record, it automatically becomes singer songwriter. A guy gets the acoustic guitar out, he starts singing about his breakups, all that nonsense. I kind of wanted to do something a little bit more of a mood piece. I love film music. I love music that is evocative of places and situations. So that's what I started doing during the pandemic. I was working in the city when the city was kind of shut down.
Right.
Um, so I was kind of walking to and from the city every day, and there was like no one there, and it was really, really, really creepy. It was kind of really desolate, and that coupled with like my love of like John Carpenter films and sci-fi and stuff, I was like, I want to capture this feeling,
Yeah.
and had really started getting into playing piano. I'm not particularly good, but I'd kind of got myself up to a level where I was like, I'm starting to write a lot on piano. This music starts to feel like what I was seeing. So that's kind of taken 4 years of just tinkering away at it, and some other projects have kind of come in between then as well. But yeah, it's my first release under my own name. I've previously released music under band names
Yeah.
before.
So during that period, you were still going to a workplace. You were
Yeah,
actually traveling into a workplace. That's interesting because one of my strongest memories of the period is when we were all going out for walks. I'm in the south side of Glasgow, and one day I walked down far enough to the M8 and went across halfway across the bridge, and there wasn't a single car on it. And just thinking, oh my God, I'm probably never going to see this in my lifetime. But that idea of a soundtrack, absolutely, it was like something from dystopian movie, and you think, yeah, this needs a soundtrack. Was that kind of what you were thinking?
exactly. Yeah, I'm also in the south of Glasgow, and I'd be walking to and from the city every day, and I think a lot of the sometimes I'd be listening to music, sometimes I'd just be listening to the essentially the silence, like you were
Yeah,
saying. There was like
yeah,
no one there, and there was a real, especially that sort of Tradeston area of, I would get down there and it just felt like no one had ever been there ever, and it's such a weird feeling of like this is one of the biggest cities in Britain, and there's barely a soul here. It was really, it's quite emotional. It was quite disorientating
yeah.
and pretty inspiring in quite a weird sadistic way. Of every film I'd watched about dystopias is coming true. It felt like Escape from New York every day going into work, and um, so yeah, that's kind of where that came from, and the idea of just trying to capture what I was seeing and what I was feeling in sound. There's a lot of field recordings that I made.
Yeah.
I've made that into the record. That I've done a lot of sound design stuff. A lot of the times, like sitting on, being the only person on a train, like going back home, felt like the Warriors. So I'd be sitting just like recording the sounds of the trains and the sounds of Glasgow Central and all that. And these kind of like just try to paint pictures with sound in a way that I've heard other people doing about other cities.
Yeah.
Low by David Bowie, one of my favorite records. It's so evocative of Berlin. There's so much the Sonic Youth records from New York in the 80s of like the field recordings that Lee Ronaldo would put into their music. And I haven't really heard a lot of people doing that, but Scotland and particularly Glasgow, obviously Mogwai do instrumental music from
Yeah.
Glasgow fantastically well. They're one of the best, but it was trying to capture a real different side of that, rather than like trying to capture it through like traditional instruments. It was more like, how can I capture this through soundscapes in a way that is more referential to a lot of like electronic music and a lot of 20th century classical as well.
So I was interested in who the kind of musical inspirations were. You mentioned a couple there, but were there others that you've
Yeah,
got?
absolutely. Like people like Angelo Badalamentieri, who does a lot of the music for David Lynch and a lot of other composers, a lot of other films. He's done a lot of work for. There's a Polish composer, Hania Rani, who's like a younger woman who's fantastic. She does a lot of stuff with like live looping with pianos and prepared pianos, and also has started to introduce her own vocals into it and synthesizers. She's incredible. Sonic Youth, as I said, is a big one for me. And other composers like I love Rachmaninoff. It's one of the composers I studied when I was at school, and
Right.
I really love the sort of work he does. Philip Glass, in Lamonte Young. There's a lot of the minimalists that came out of like New York in the sort of 50s and 60s that came through, of really stretching what you could call a composition. Of sometimes it's just like one note played for hours, and I didn't want to take things that far, because there's a fine line between it being an experiment and a song, and a lot of experimental music it's very chin stroking. I wanted to have something that evoked emotions rather than was this like excite. It was rather than just being experimental for the sake of experimenting. Brian Eno obviously is a big one. I think he's a brilliant cross section of taking ideas and theories and applying it to actual music that makes you feel something.
Yeah. I mean, you say that about doing a track that was too long. The final track's 26 minutes long. Is that?
It was initially, it was maybe 10, and that's like the only song that was live drums on. When I was recording the drums, I just kept on thinking of ideas. I was like, I'm just going to record it and we'll see what happens. I might churn this down, I might add to it, and made some loops out of it. And I was like, I might just see how long I can push this, because I always liked long music. I've got like I do have a very strong attention span.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the other things that came along with making this record was in 2021, I got a diagnosis of having OCD, which
Right.
makes perfect sense to any of the sort of music I make. It's like I have very concentrated bursts of attention on long periods of music, and I really like things that really focus in on ideas
Right.
and really let ideas develop. Whereas that was kind of where I was starting to get a bit done in with like 3 minute songs. I'm like, oh, I wish this section could just keep going for hours. Like when you listen to Can and Neu and
Yeah.
Anschlussend and Neubauten, bands that really let the music extend, and it really makes me feel something. Repetition
Yeah.
can really become quite evocative. So again, that was another thing I wanted to try and make the music feel like. And that last track in particular, I've always kind of like the band that I was mainly in my 20s was a hardcore band called Carnivals, and in that band it was relatively political and socially motivated in a very left wing way. And I've kind of steered away from politics for quite a while when I've been writing, because I didn't really feel like there was much left to say, because it's dead easy to be like, hey man, the government are terrible.
Mhm.
It's really easy, but like no one really says anything different. But with I hope you're satisfied, Thatcher,
Yeah.
I wanted to capture the feeling of just what it's been like for the last 14 years under quite an oppressive government, of just through instrumental. I didn't want to write any lyrics or try and say a particular message. It was more about, as I said, capturing that feeling of just like, if I'm going to use guitars, I'm going to use every guitar I have. If I'm
Mhm.
going to use drums, I'm going to make it the most distorted, live, wild drums I can play. I really want to just make it a kind of intense kind of exorcism feeling. And initially the record's meant to come out last year, and I didn't have time to finish it. So it's weird that it's came out after that government have
Yeah.
been it.
Uh, and I think there's something, because I'm like you, I love a long music you can kind of lose yourself in. And the people that you mentioned earlier on all have that about them. it becomes almost meditative, you know, that you kind of, it's especially when it's got repetitiveness throughout, you know. I think I'm a big fan of a 3-minute, 4-minute pop song, but there is something about that which I think is special. And there's other tracks on the album when we played on the show previously that's like 9 minutes long. You allow the ideas and the music itself to kind of breathe, if you like.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was like I've spoke to a lot of friends who are songwriters and producers working in the pop field, and so much of their energy spent not, I don't want to say pandering, but almost changing the emphasis of a song to match what an algorithmic concept is for applications and promotion, like for Instagram or TikTok videos, and like firing the chorus right at the start of the song, or making the title of the song the main prominent thing. And it's like I kind of don't want to assume anything about a listener, but I know what I like, and I've got the attention span to let something breathe and take something in. And it was more of just like, I want to make music for me rather than thinking about how can I get this across best. Because I've second guessed myself quite a lot when I've been writing, and this time I was just like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go hell for leather, because it was initially just like me sitting in this room, just playing, just making up ideas and not thinking of it as a release. It was more not thinking of it as a commercial release, thinking of it as an emotional release first and foremost, rather than thinking, right, this a song? Is this a concept? You know, so it was quite freeing to let ideas breathe and spend ages just like playing with synthesizers and having fun, and really treating the recording like a proper creative outlet rather than as a function of, sometimes when you write songs, it's like, cool, I've got this message or this idea that I really want to capture, but you've got 2 verses, 2 choruses, and an intro, and you can, unless you're incredibly smart and emotionally intelligent, it's quite difficult to do that.
Yeah.
You know, some of the best songwriters around, like Elvis Costello, is a master of being able to like cram so much information into a 3-minute song.
Absolutely.
But I'm not like that. Like I really struggle in terms of writing lyrics that way. Of there's always that, like, if I could just say that extra thing, you know, it's quite difficult. So yeah, that was where I was at.
And are there Glasgow albums that you're particularly fond of?
Oh, definitely. I mean, Hats by Blue Nile is the big one.
Mm-hmm.
That was one that I always remember. Both my mum and my dad had that CD in their houses, not knowing what it was, but loving the artwork.
Yeah.
And I would hear them playing it, but I didn't associate who the band was to the CD. And it wasn't until like I was in like kind of approaching teenage years where it was like, I think this is maybe really uncool to tell my friends that I like this music. And then like mentioned it briefly to some friends in high school, and they were like, oh yeah, we really like the Blue Nile too. And it became this thing of, we were like the second, like the second generation of Blue Nile fans. Of, we weren't there at the time, but we kind of got into them through osmosis. And it's just a record that's really lived with me through like all my life. And I think Paul Buchanan's voice is so evocative, and the soundscapes they make. But I think the great thing about them is the songs can be stripped down to just one instrument and a voice, and they still work. That's the power of them. So yeah, Hats by Blue Nile. I do love Mogwai. Come On Die Young in particular, I think it's a really special record. I think that's kind of them at the point where they start to really dig into the more experimental side rather than just leathering people with noise. They start to get into the subtleties a wee bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that record. They're not Glasgow bands, but the first 3 Biffy Clyro records mean the world to me. Like, they were, I think everyone's kind of got the band that come along just as your adolescence is about to kick off. And I remember hearing them for the first time on New Year's Eve 2001. I was like 14, and it was like, or 13 rather, and it was like, this is everything I like in one band. You know, it's loud and it's raucous, but they've also got quieter, more introspective songs and weird time signatures and loads of harmonies. So yeah, they're a big one for me.
I was just thinking as well, when I was thinking about some of my favourite albums, either by or about Glasgow, rain is, as with yours, is often to the forefront, you know. And am I right in saying that this is a soundtrack to film as well? Is that right?
Yeah, so I had the idea of initially there was a kind of thing when I had a lot of music. At one point I had like 3 hours worth of music, and I was starting to narrow down what has a theme that runs through it and what is just cool pieces of music, and then put some stuff to the side. And I started to think quite pragmatically of I want to start scoring for film, but there's not like a LinkedIn for composers. So I was like, I should maybe create something that showcases how my music can work with images. So I started to film a bunch of stuff around Glasgow, like I said, back in the pandemic. Filmed some stuff all the time, just on my phone. Found a lot of kind of open source documentaries, and I've edited together it's like a surrealist sort of non-narrative accompaniment to the record. I didn't want to do something that was particularly stringent towards like the idea of music videos and anything. That's more something that you could put on, and it's meant to represent how the music feels, and subsequently things that represent an idea of Glasgow. Like the like, so a big thing with the record is how nostalgia can be something that's really, really good, but also something that's quite painful for a lot of people. And there's an idea of Glasgow I've got in my head from growing up, and probably similar to yourself, that doesn't exist anymore. And in our heads, we probably think it's better than it actually was.
Sure.
And that's one of the big themes in the record of people are always talking about the good old days, but I remember what Glasgow was like, and it like back then it was dangerous and smoky, and nothing was clean, and you couldn't go anywhere, and there was nowhere good to get a coffee. Do you know what I mean? Like there's that like idea of
Definitely
what you grew up with is somehow the best. And so I wanted to kind of capture a lot of what Glasgow is in my memory against what it is now. So there's a lot of contrasting shots of I've spoken about Tradeston and like the Gorbals and places around kind of like Springburn and the north of Glasgow, where I spent a lot of time growing up, that doesn't exist anymore. In comparison to what that's like now. So the film I'm going to be releasing fairly soon, probably towards the end of this year. It runs the entire length of the record, so it's meant to be like a visual accompaniment you can just put on, and the images will wash over and match the music. There's a lot of it is meant to feel like old VHS tapes that you would get at home. Like there'd be like bits of a football match you taped off the telly, half a taggart, some of the news, like these things that like warble in and out, and it feels a bit like a dream state almost, you know. As I said earlier on, I love David Lynch, obviously, because I live in the south side of Glasgow and I drink coffee. Of course, I love David Lynch. So I love the way that he can capture sort of in between emotions, you know, things that aren't particularly black and white. Like it's something that can be really funny, but also really sad at the same time, or quite creepy, but also you want to dive into it. So it's running those sort of themes.
Yeah. I've been rewatching Twin Peaks actually, just as you were saying that. But what David Lynch does is to find the kind of darkness and oddity behind what appears to be ordinary.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the interesting thing about writing an album about a city, is that you can kind of take it in so many directions. And I'm guessing this is the only album to have a track called Squinty Bridge.
Yeah.
You know, it's absolute, but it's so evocative. And I think are you going to be showing the film? Is that a possibility that you might be able to show it places?
If there's demand for it, I'm very much in the kind of place I'm in terms of performance in organizing events is incredibly difficult these days.
Yeah, sure.
I grew up in the very much the DIY scene of punk rock. If you just do it yourself, you don't wait for permission, you don't wait to be asked, you just go and do it. And that was fine when Glasgow was awash with venues and awash with places that you could put on events. The other band that I'm in, Ripley, who are sort of pop alternative bands, we put on our own shows, we do everything ourselves, and even just trying to get responses from venues via email is really difficult. So the logistics of trying to show a film and do something that runs alongside it would be quite challenging. So if people like it and there's demand, then possibly, but it's not something I'm going to seek out and do. Mainly, probably because of the financial outlays that would come in with something like this. I think the avenues for independent art is getting smaller and smaller. We saw the nonsense with Creative Scotland last year, and some of the misjudgments that they've made is quite telling. That I think working class art is something that is the lifeblood of our country, but it doesn't really seem to get any help. Whereas the minute Scottish ballet needs help, they jump to it, and working class art is the thing that makes Scotland really, really important, and we're quite happy to put posters of Mogwai and Travis and Deacon Blue and Primal Scream and Blue Nile everywhere, but the minute a venue needs to get saved, it's like, nah, we need more student flats.
Yeah, there is that, definitely. So you spoke about how, kind of Glasgow has changed, and if you go in to visit Glasgow physically, there is these changes without a doubt. And I think, in my experience, there's people looking to put on gigs, but the venues that are still there are absolutely, you're trying to find a space. You maybe be talking 6, 9 a year in advance before you could even get looked at.
Exactly, and there's still some fantastic independent venues in the city.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've always had a really good relationship with people who run audio and Slay, and they're great, and especially they go out their way to try and make very inclusive spaces, which is something that's really important to me. Is you need to make art available to everyone. It shouldn't just be a particular subsect of society that's allowed to go or included in live music. It's something that growing up, it's something that's kind of male privilege of I've never felt unsafe going to gigs. As a boy from Paisley going into Glasgow to go to gigs, it's fine. Nothing intimidates you. But if you're a young woman or a young queer person going to gigs, it could be quite an intense experience, I'd imagine. So I like I said, the people at Audio and Slay are really, really nice. They create really welcoming spaces for people. But it's challenging because there's a lot of gigs and there's a lot of demand, but there's not a lot of venues.
Yeah.
And it's a shame because gigs are amazing. I think if we still had the same infrastructure we had 15 years ago, I would still be playing quite a lot. But it's even going through to Edinburgh, and you see the things in Edinburgh of the licensing laws meaning that there's noise limits after certain times of the day and all that. And it's like, come on.
And again, after the one thing not the one thing, but one of the things that really struck me after lockdown and COVID was going to gigs again, and how joyous that was, and how both audiences and the bands playing were just, oh, thank God we're able to do this again. And quite quickly, a bit like us kind of remembering what it was like to walk about an empty city, people forget very quickly that, that's what it was like. And, you are in danger of losing something really special there, I think, if it financially, and I just guess like yourself, you just go, this is too hard to keep on playing live, and I'm going to do something else.
I think as well, without passing the cost on to the consumer as well, because I've always tried to run from the ethics of the band Fugazi and their label Discord in Washington. Of they used to put stickers on their LPs to be like, don't buy this if it's over $10 or something. And that's the same with like ticket prices. I don't see how places can really justify the prices of tickets that are going out. Like in my living room, I've got a big print made up of all my gig tickets from growing up, and there was a Slipknot ticket there from 2002. I think it was maybe 20 quid to see Slipknot at the SEC in 2002. They're playing the Hydro, I think, this week, and I think it's close to £100.
Yeah.
Even in line with inflation, you're like, how can this be justified? Like, it's still an arena show. It's still 9 people in the band. But why is the consumer the person that foots the bill for that? That's the frustrating thing of how much things have got to a point where it's no longer feasible for working class people to go to football and go to concerts as much as they'd want. Art should be for everyone. It should be this pleasure that we all get. It shouldn't be a luxury.
Yeah.
And that's the real challenge for me as an artist, is when I've been putting on shows, is making sure that, you know, it's a tenner, the gig finishes at 10:30, so you can get a train up the road. It's a venue that people can get into even if they've got accessibility needs. There's, you know, all these considerations that I think a lot of people don't think about, because there's just a demand that the gig will sell out anyway, so it doesn't really matter who goes. It's like,
Yeah.
that doesn't matter who goes. It matters that people should be able to consume art and enjoy it and be able to have an appreciation of something without being put out by it.
Yeah, everyone should have at least the chance to go, rather.
Exactly. Yeah. It'd be a choice. If you choose not to go, that's cool, but you should at least have the option to.
And just before we go, you mentioned Ripley, who we've played on the show previously. What's any news with them? I know you had releases this year.
Yeah, we're always writing. Sarah and I are always writing. We released 2 EPs, chapter 1 and chapter 2. We have got maybe 20 songs we're just working at the moment. We always write. We never write in the same room, which I think is quite important. Generally, one person starts a song, the other person finishes it. So we're always working back and forth. I am quite a nocturnal person, so I tend to work late into the night. Sarah's the opposite. She likes to work during the day and get a lot of daylight, whereas I'm a goth vampire person. So we've got a big backlog of material we're working through. We'll probably put some stuff out early next year. No plans for live at the moment, but the songs are plentiful.
Good.
So yeah, there's another couple of projects I'm working on too that hopefully in 2025 I'll do something that's quite raucous again. I'm starting to get a feel for playing something loud and nasty. I think I always like to do something quite different from what I've done previously. And City Life in the Rain, it's quite. I wrote it with no intention of ever being able to actually physically play it, because it's a studio record.
Sure.
So when I've been writing for what possibly will be our next record, I've been trying to write in a way of, like I was saying about the Blue Nile, of can I strip this back to one instrument and it has the same effect?
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to be more considered with my writing, and as I've also been developing as a piano player, because I've been playing guitar since I was 10 years old, so the best part of 28 years or whatever. So I'm fairly adept at playing guitar, but playing piano is still an experimental, quite exploratory process. So the songwriting and composition develops as I develop as a musician, which is pretty exciting. So I've been writing loads for that, and will hopefully at some point start getting offers for Hollywood to do big, massive thriller soundtracks, but I doubt it.
Who knows? Who knows? Well, when you do have new music, let me know, and we'll play it out on the show. Kenny, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for supporting music.
And this is Kenny Leckie and X Text Part 1.